Joining us now, Congressman, Republican, 7th District of Virginia, Dr. Dave Brat. Dr. Brat, good to have you, sir.
Hey, John, thanks. Always great to be on.
Happy President's Day.
Happy President's Day, you bet.
I know everybody's home today. Banks closed, post office closed, schools closed, kids are home, all the good stuff. Let's get to the shooting in Florida. Another just horrific event. Looks like the FBI has some clues maybe they didn't act on. You can always do Monday morning quarterbacking. I don't know what the circumstances were there. But, Congressman, you and I both are staunch believers in the Second Amendment, right?
Yeah, you got it.
I mean, don't you think that those of us that believe in the Second Amendment, don't you think there has to be just a legitimate debate about where we're going with these AR-15s and stuff? I mean, shouldn't we at least have a conversation about it?
You know, I think it's fine to have rational dialogue on everything. And, I mean, usually the press just comes off and it is so hyper-partisan right now. Everybody, one side goes here, one side goes there. There's no rationality. But if you go through these incidences, these horrific tragedies, one by one, and just unpack them rationally and go to the cause and investigate and wait a few days till all the evidence comes in, I think that's the most fruitful path for analysis. And when you wait, you start seeing, okay, there were a lot of balls dropped here, a lot. And so the initial rush to judgment doesn't take into account all the facts. And so what you just said about the FBI and 20 calls to the home, and the FBI admits they dropped the ball, and folks called in with, just terrible descriptions of what was going on in this home and the psychiatric background and guns and the Facebook messages that were there. I mean, that's evidence. It's all right there. And so it seems to me there is a pathway to make sure that type of person doesn't get the gun in their hand, and we got to do a better job of it. How
do we do that? Like a longer waiting period? How do we do that?
Well, with this young man, and that does get right. Everyone that thinks this is some simple conversation, it's not simple at all. It's going to be very complex because on the same time, my good friends on the left are very sensitive about HIPAA laws and all these regulations that have been put in place to protect people. I was in the college environment for a while, and so just one example, right? A young person, once they hit 18, and if there's any mental health records or whatever, the parents are limited in what they can do for their child who is now 18. And so that's an example of something where, hey, there's crucial information that has to be in the pipeline. But there's all these regulations and safety precautions, et cetera, that keep that information from making it in the pipeline, right, to the schools, to the mental health people, to the sheriff, to the police, to the FBI. And so those are some of the walls we're going to have to start looking at to see, hey, we've got to do a better job of getting the right information where it has to be. In this case, some of those walls weren't there. The information was right there for everybody to see, and it just wasn't shared. So we've got to figure that out.
Look, no question about it. You look at the number of communications that went to the FBI from people that knew there was something the matter with this young man, and the fact that he was accumulating guns and he had these social media posts, and it was all pointing in the direction of something bad happening. There was no action taken. But then on the other hand, you say, well, we have freedom of speech. What action could you take, really? What action could they take? Maybe keep an eye on him or something of that nature. I don't know. It seems, though, that there ought to be a way to have a discussion about limiting the access of an AR-15 to some person like this young man that had obviously a long history of mental challenges. Let's just leave it at that. And, maybe there's a different formula. Maybe there's a longer wait period. Maybe there's something. But I think we at least have to have the debate. Dave, agree?
Yeah. Well, that's right. In Florida, some of these things, Florida had, handguns, I think, was 21, and AR-15 was 15. 18 years of age, et cetera. But another horrifying stat that came up, too, was on the front page of the RTD or near the front page.
Right.
I make sure I think I got the number right, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of 9,000 threats of attack by students
right
in Virginia,
right
in one state. 9,000 attacks. Now that we need to spend equal amount of time on, right? And so you've got a gun issue, but you've got 9,000 threats of attack in Virginia alone. And so that's a huge deal. And we got to say, when I was in school, when you were in school, you didn't have 9,000 threats on the school and on kids. This is a new culture we're living in. We got to examine the ethical backdrop, the cultural backdrop for how are we producing this kind of a culture.
I think you're right. Absolutely spot on. There's something here is wrong. And here's my only argument. If you keep going down the same path, Congressman, you end up in the same place, right? So, the number of massacres now we're having in our high schools and middle schools is it's beyond the pale. It's beyond anything that I've ever seen. It's beyond anything that anybody's seen. And you're now just waiting for the next one. So I think the country has to have a dialogue about this, and it just can't be the same old stuff. And you hit it on the head when you came on. You said we get an horrific incident like this, and both sides immediately go down their rabbit holes, and they put up the barriers, and so you get nowhere. And I really think any dialogue on any changes in the ability for somebody 18 to get an AR-15 or any other kind of type of a weapon, I think has to come solely from the Second Amendment advocates. Because once you get the other side in the debate, everybody goes into their, as you say, they go into their positions, and that's the end of it, and it becomes irrational. So hopefully we can have that dialogue.
Yeah, no, that's right. And, the schools have done a good job on diversity and, issues with genders and races, and et cetera. The kids get along much better across all these categories or whatever, but there still is the category of the loner, right, who's out there. And I don't care what faith tradition you're from, right? You're
right.
supposed to try to befriend these people, right? And so when these schools, right now, the schools, everyone, gets along, and we've got good inclusion and tolerance, and all that's great. But there's still cliques, right? Everyone's hanging out in their cliques, and then there's these loners off on the side. And so we got to do a better job of taking care of everybody in that respect, too. Everybody, I always try to find everybody in a room and say hi to everybody. And in the schools, the kids got to do the same kind of thing, right? If you see some lonely kid that's not got any friends, well, do your best, right? I think that's the order of things.
No question. Congressman, let's get to the new 13 indictments by the special counsel on these Russian trolling farms. The Justice Department went out of their way to say no Americans are involved in the indictments. There's no evidence of any Americans being involved. There's no evidence of any Trump collusion with the campaign or anything of that nature. What does this mean?
Well, it's what you don't know if it's the beginning step or the middle step or the final steps here or whatever. So, this I just take as one piece of evidence. Okay, they went out and, thank goodness they followed their mission. That was the mission, to follow the thesis statement. What was the role of the Russians in the past election? And so they put out their facts right now. There was a significant orchestrated attack with millions of dollars, 13 people that you know of. Bots, all sorts of new cyber questions for us to address, right, that also infringe on the freedom of thought, too, right? So we got it's kind of a common denominator here in terms of the troubles we're having in this country, in terms of when these folks are using all of our assets and technologies to assault us. But that's kind of where it ends, right? So the Russians are involved. No U.S. Wittingly knew about what's going on. No links to collusion and all this kind of thing. And so the press has been way out over its skis, reaching conclusions way ahead. I watched CNN the day that this thing came out, and it was just the most bizarre. It wasn't news. It's just opinion pieces, people just rattling off animus toward the president that this is proof of everything. And it was not proof of that. And on the other hand, you don't want to get ahead of your skis and say that they're not going to find anything in the future because it's an open-ended investigation. And so that's where we are. One step, significant influence by the Russians in our elections. We got to wake up, do our best to fight that off, and we'll see where the investigation goes.
Well, look, I mean, right now, I think the president so far is totally exonerated, and I could see his frustration. You know, you mentioned CNN and some of the opinion pieces on it. The Justice Department said, and the special counsel said, there is no evidence of any American being involved in this. There is no evidence of anybody in the Trump campaign being involved in this. So, look, if you're the president, you've undergone this investigation for now, 16 months. There's a zero shred of evidence, and yet every day it's still out there.
Yep.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard to understand, but I mean, when you see the work done in the bias in the FBI, right now it's 7 people that have been fired or stepped down or whatever,
right?
Senior political appointees in the FBI.
Right.
And so that's why I'm just a little cautionary, because you don't know who's coming after, the president to take them down. Several people were, in their own words, right? They got text messages, we're going to take this guy down. We got an alternative plan in case he wins. We don't want him to win. So it's all sitting right there. It's not intent, it's fact. I mean, they wrote it. And so when you got political appointees from the other side, the Obama administration folks, I mean, it's very ironic. The left opened this stuff up in order to go after the president, and it's backfiring and hitting the left all over the place. I mean, it's ricocheting off all of this deep state stuff, and the State Department's coming up next, where there's just way too much political bias in major institutions, and we got to get rid of it.
Spot on. So, Congressman, the tax cut is becoming more and more popular. Public opinions polls now showing that a clear majority of Americans are benefiting by the tax cut, by the Trump Republican tax cut, benefiting from it, happy with it, getting bonuses, getting a bigger paycheck. Public opinion for it is growing rapidly. John McLaughlin just came out with a poll over the weekend saying that Republicans have now tied the Democrats on the generic congressional ballot. This is a disaster for the Dems, all right, because they're banking on this big wave. Now, what the Democrats are saying, though, is they're starting to emphasize that company stock buybacks help make their case against the GOP tax law ahead of the midterms, and they're criticizing the windfalls that people can get from stock buybacks. What the hell does that have to do with the average guy or gal that's getting another $70 in their paycheck or got a $1,000 bonus from their company?
Well, nothing. I mean, that's been their talking point for months now. It's a good thing that's their talking point, because it doesn't make any sense and no one knows what it means.
Right.
So if they're going that road, I mean, I love it. We're going to have the Atlanta Fed has us growing at over 5% next quarter. I hope that comes about. If that comes about, then all the theory, right? It's important for people to understand economic theory is not correct. Theory is supposed to explain the real world, the facts. And so if you get a data point at over 5% in the real world, that's what matters. And then all the theory and all the economists are going to be dead wrong, who all said we can only grow at 2%. They're all going to be wrong. They're all going to be eating crow. And American exceptionalism will be back. And then we're also waiting on, in addition to what you just said, right, millions of people with $1,000 bonuses plus wage rates going up. We got wage inflation scares now because the economy is maybe too hot. And then the final nail will be as soon as the capital investment statistics come out.
Right.
That's the real economy, right? You're going to see the transformational impact on the macro economy of these tax cuts. That's what's already going on. You're already seeing the early fruit, but there's no data out yet. So once you see those capital stocks going up, right, from firms making long-term bets about the future and optimism in this country and putting capital to work in the hands of the American worker, that increases productivity. That's the only thing really that increases productivity, right? Technology, capital investment. And once you see that, it's game over, and then the Dems can say, and it's not all the Dem, but the left and the talking heads. It's just numbing their commentary on the economics, and they're no votes, no help from the Democrats on tax cuts that are making the country take off and giving kids jobs and raising everybody's wages at home. So they're going to have some tough selling. They're going to have a tough road ahead because all the real-world evidence looks favorable.
All right, so let's talk very quickly about interest rates going up, and some people saying that might fuel some inflation, obviously. But look, we had quantitative easing for a very long time where interest rates the Fed kept them way down under market equilibrium. So now as the economy is growing, they need to raise the interest rate to get it back into market equilibrium, right?
Yep. No, that's right. And let's start the story way back at the beginning, because the Democrats also fudged so terrible on this one. It makes my heart rate go up. What caused the financial crisis? Fact. The financial crisis started only in one sector, and that was the housing sector. And every analyst will tell you the failure had to do with measurement of risk and giving out free mortgages and free loans through Fannie and Freddie. And then that spread into the financial markets. So overregulation and total mismanagement by Fannie and Freddie and the federal government caused the financial crisis. In order to cope with a government failure, we had to do more government failure. You had to do stimulative fiscal policy and print $4 trillion in the Federal Reserve Bank vaults that created artificially low interest rates that you're just talking about. So one error in Democrat economic policy leads to the next error that lasts 9 years. Mm-hmm. So you don't have a real economy. We're overstimulating and giving sugar to the economy through the Obama years so it could grow at 1.5 or 2. It would have been shrinking, right? You would have been in a total recession with all that stimulus. So now Republicans come in with normal economic stimulus, right, trying to invest in capital equipment. That's the real economy that will actually work. And it's working. And so now you're going to have some signs of overheating, which is a good thing. And interest rates are going to go up to their norms, like 3 or 4 or 5%. That's a good thing. And so in the short run, that'll be a little painful, but we're getting back to a real economy based on the fundamentals instead of based on just government nonsense. And that people got to make up their minds on that. Do you want an economy run by the economy, or do you want the government continuously meddling in your life with overregulation, messing around with free money, printing money, going into $21 trillion in debt? And that it's a total failure. And all the evidence is in on that.
All right. Speaking of evidence in, we're out of time. I want to thank Congressman, 7th District Republican Dave Brat for being with us. More information. Hey, it's so easy. Go to davebrat.com. davebrat.com. Congressman, as always, thanks for being with us. See you next week.
Thanks, John.